Albuquerque City Attorney Lauren Keefe, thank you for joining me on New Mexico in Focus this week.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start with a bit of an overview of Mayor Tim Keller's policies when it comes to removing homeless people from public property. How much notice do city employees give when responding to a call to clear an encampment?
That will often depend on the circumstances. So it's not one answer for every encampment, but our general policy has been 72 hours, and we try to abide by that on most locations. We are currently, or I should say, the city administration is in the process of evaluating that and how much notice is necessary for various types of encampments. Not every encampment is the same. And so that what they're really looking at is what's the appropriate level of notice in each type of area, in each type of circumstances, including what kinds of activities are occurring, where the encampment is, how close it is to a school, things like that.
Gotcha. Of course, in June, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled local ordinances with penalties for camping on public land do not constitute cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment. Has the city changed its approach to clearing encampments since that ruling?
It has not. It has been, even before that ruling, evaluating its processes and evaluating how it should continue to respond, but there was no immediate change in any of the city's practices. And I will say some people have had the perception that something is different and have asked us that. But just as an example, we didn't immediately materialize more staff, and we didn't to conduct any more clearings than we had been doing before. We had the same crews that we had before the grants passed decision. We had the same processes we had before the grants passed decision, and we're continuing with those, but evaluating the best way to keep city property clear for its appropriate function, while also trying to protect the rights of the unhoused and encourage the unhoused to take advantage of the shelter opportunities that are available.
I agree that that perception exists. I've certainly heard anecdotally from providers and others that it does feel like something is different. Can you describe that sort of evaluation process just a little bit more? Can you give viewers a sense of how the city is going about evaluating its practices and policies?
Yes, so there's been, sort of a small group of department directors and others convened. We started with the existing written policy and started looking at what our current practices are and what we can and cannot do, and also what our priorities are in terms of locations, in terms of some locations where it's important to keep the area clear and to keep it clear immediately versus locations where there can be some leeway to allow an encampment for some period of time. And also what's working in terms of, again, encouraging people to go into the shelters that are available and our ability to stand up beds as needed to make sure that we have enough beds for anybody who does want them. So there's been a small group meeting. They were looking at the policy. We're looking at the written notice and what it should and should not say. And we're looking at how we can collect data, because very often we get so many questions about our practices, and we have quite a bit of data that we collect. We're looking at a way we can gather it and be able to communicate more effectively on our processes when we do get these questions.
Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit. We know that when it comes to homeless encampments, sometimes Albuquerque Community Safety responds, and in other cases, it's APD. What are the criteria for deciding which of those two entities responds to a call?
So ACS will generally respond when there's any kind of indication that there's somebody having a behavioral health crisis. If there is a call into 311 and that there's any indication of that, they will generally dispatch ACS. The exception will be if there's any kind of danger, if a person has a weapon, or if there's any other factor that might lead us to believe that there's danger, then we'll need to send APD out. ACS has a team now that does proactive outreach. So in addition to responding to 311 calls, it does proactive outreach to encampments and to other unhoused individuals within the city, again, to try to encourage them to get into shelter, to try and work with them, to find out what the barriers are and see if they can be connected with services. APD, of course, does not do any of that kind of proactive engagement with the unhoused population. But to be clear, the people who primarily deal with encampments are employees of the Health, Housing, and Homelessness Department. in what we call the interaction team. And it's the interaction team that responds to a call of an encampment, that they go out, that they make an offer of shelter to those individuals. And if those individuals accept, ACS will provide transportation. If they do not accept, that's when they will receive notice of the city's intent to clear an encampment or to clear an area. And they will be given a written notice and informed as to when the city will take its action to clear that area. So people often talk about ACS and APD, and I do always want to clarify that it's really not either of those that are out there giving notice. And another thing that I think might be important to clear up, because I get the question a lot, or the city does a lot, they'll say that, oh, but we saw the city clearing an encampment and no one was there asking if they wanted shelter. And that's not the stage of the process where we make that offer. We make that offer at the outset when we're giving notice. If the people decline and we then give them notice, then later solid waste comes along and does the clearance, and we may or may not be able to make another offer of shelter, but it's the beginning of the process, not the end of the process when we do that.
I appreciate the clarification, Lauren. Who is making that call? Is it someone in the dispatch center in terms of like the decision on who goes first, who goes maybe on a subsequent call? When that call comes into 311 or 911, who's making the decision on who responds?
So there's a couple different processes in play, but when there's a call to 311, just reporting the fact of an encampment, which we get hundreds of calls every week, just reporting the fact that an encampment has formed. All of those encampment calls go to the interaction team. If there's a 911 call, the operators or 311, the operators may dispatch ACS if they think that ACS would be the appropriate responder. Again, if it's a matter of someone is having a behavioral health crisis, that person may or may not be unhoused. When ACS is responding to a call, a 311 call or a 911 call, it's not because there's an unhoused person, it's because there's a person having a behavioral health crisis. That person may be unhoused and ACS will then engage in its processes. APD will be dispatched if there's any kind of danger. But as I said, ACS also has a separate team that does proactive outreach to the unhoused community.
And so for people who don't understand the way dispatchers work and the way they're licensed in the state, are they trained specifically on things to look for when they're making that decision on who to send?
They are, and they have been since ACS was created, and we've been, the city will revise its script from time to time to ensure that the operators, whether it's 311 or 911, are directing the appropriate calls to ACS and as many calls as they can, while also ensuring that the appropriate calls are sent to APD if there's any reason to believe there's going to be any kind of dangerous situation where APD is required.
Now, during a recent town hall in Albuquerque, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham was asked about California Governor Gavin Newsom's executive order calling for the shutdown of encampments on state property and urging local jurisdictions to do the same. Our governor said she was, quote, looking at that order carefully, end quote. She also said Mayor Keller, quote, is very interested in how we might work together on a concept, end quote. Have the mayor and the governor had any conversations about developing something like what we're seeing in California?
I don't know if I can answer that question. I certainly know that before that town hall, they had some conversations after Governor Newsom issued that order as well. And we've looked at some orders that have been issued by other cities. But I don't know if there are continuing conversations. I certainly know that the mayor wants to partner with the governor to make sure that there is a coherent, effective response to encampments within the city.
What might this look like if the mayor were able to sit down with a legal pad and sort of sketch it out himself and present it to the governor?
Right. See, I can't speak for the mayor. I don't know. I do know that we are looking at other cities. And so I actually think we were trying to answer that question. I would say that I don't know what's in his mind, but I also don't know if we can answer that question right now. We have looked at a number of other cities to see if we can develop best practices or the best model that would most closely fit Albuquerque, to see if we can, again, come up with a practice that does its best to encourage people to utilize shelter, but also make sure that there aren't encampments in sensitive areas within the city.
Late last month, the Albuquerque Human Rights Board issued a preliminary report on the city's handling of homelessness and found the city routinely violates the autonomy, dignity, and rights of unhoused individuals. What is the city's reaction to that report?
The report was disappointing in many ways, but the primary one is that the Human Rights Board provided neither the city nor its workers any opportunity to respond to any allegations or any specific claims before issuing this report. And that the Human Rights Board took held a public forum, which the city allowed it to do, and created a transcript of that forum, but then reached some conclusions that aren't supported by that transcript. It made some very broad, very serious accusations against people who are employed by the city of Albuquerque that aren't supported by that transcript, and without giving those workers a chance to respond. And I think that we expect more from all of our boards and commissions as we would from any city department. Any city department that was making accusations, we would expect them to conduct an appropriate level of due diligence, and I don't think that happened here.
Okay, I want to start with sort of the idea that you guys felt blindsided by this a little bit. There were multiple employees from the mayor's office cited in the acknowledgements section of that report. I wonder if you feel like those were improper acknowledgements, or was the mayor's office involved before this report was released?
I am not aware that the mayor's office was involved in the development of this report.
Okay,
So I'm
consulted?
not sure what it is that what Ms. Doss was acknowledging when she included those acknowledgements.
Okay.
I'm not
When you
aware.
mentioned, excuse me, when you mentioned some of the really serious accusations that were laid out in that report, can you talk about some of the ones that in particular sort of stuck in y'all's craw?
I don't know if I would use the phrase stuck in the craw, but I think the things that jumped out is that they used the word criminal. They accused city employees of engaging in criminal conduct without specifying what it is that they believe is criminal, identifying any actions that would be criminal, and again, without giving anyone an opportunity to respond to the accusation that their conduct was criminal. So that one really jumped out at me. Also, they concluded somehow that the city had violated the injunction that was issued back in September of 2023. That injunction has been vacated retroactively. But also the city worked diligently to comply with the injunction, while at the same time letting both the district court judge and the New Mexico Supreme Court judges know that it was vague and unclear and in some ways not possible to comply with. We eventually the district court judge vacated it on his own without a subsequent motion from the city. And the basis for that injunction has now been invalidated by the U.S. Supreme Court decision. But regardless, we worked very hard to comply with it. And we, in fact, are continuing the same processes that we developed while the injunction was in place, even after the injunction was vacated and even after the grants pass decision. And some of the specific examples that are cited are not violations of the injunction. So it was disturbing to see a board reach that conclusion and reach it erroneously.
You've got some methodology concerns among other concerns, it sounds like. I wonder, is the administration looking at the report seriously for any potential improvements to its policies and practices around addressing this issue?
But the administration is looking at the report seriously. We look at everything seriously. But again, we were also in the process of evaluating our policies and practices at the time this report came out. We had been for months. We have been throughout the injunction period. Since the injunction started, we have been having discussions and honing our processes to do the best job we can to protect the rights of unhoused while also keeping sensitive areas clear. We've been working on this the whole time, but had been really making concerted effort in the past 4 or 5 months to look at our practices and decide how to move forward when this report came out. So but yes, we will certainly look at that report. We have reviewed the testimony that was given. A lot of the testimony really raised concerns about the dangers of living in encampments as opposed to genuine concerns about city conduct that, that emphasize the need to clear encampments and get people into safer spaces than they are when they're living out of the streets.
Albuquerque City Attorney Lauren Keefe, I really appreciate you being with me this week. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.